you so much for joining us for the next episode of our social media podcast mini-series. This is a series that is presented by the SMA's Physicians in Training Leadership Committee. Today, we're joined by Sarah Gardner. She is the director of the Pathologist Assistant Program at the Tulane University School of Medicine and an adjunct assistant professor at the Tulane University School of Science and Engineering. Sarah has an established presence on social media on both Instagram and Twitter. Her Instagram account, Passion for Pathology, has garnered more than 60,000 followers. Welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Julie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. So, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your many roles at Tulane?
Sure. So I do have a couple different roles. So my main role is the director of the Pathologist Assistant Program. So this is actually a new program. We just started our second cohort here. And so my role for that is, it kind of varies based on the day, but I teach in almost every single class in the program, and I deal with all of the administrative stuff and applications and things like that. So that program is kind of like my baby. I designed it. It took, I don't even know how many years to kind of design the curriculum and get it all set up. And so we did accept our first cohort in January of 2020. And so they're now second years. So that's really exciting. I also teach at the medical school in a couple of different ways. So I teach the first and second year medical students in a didactic setting. So I teach in the gross anatomy class, the histology class, sometimes the pathology class. And then in their fourth year, typically, if anybody's doing pathology rotations, then I get to interact with the medical students then. And then also in the kind of hospital setting, most of the time I interact with the pathology residents as well. So I get to teach them in anatomic pathology. And then my other kind of role is over here where I am today. It's at the School of Science and Engineering, so on our other Tulane campus. And so here I get to teach a bunch of different classes, including a couple different anatomy classes and histology classes. And so with that, I get to teach grad students, undergrad students of all different majors. And so that's a lot of fun too. And then it all kind of just ties together depending on the day.
Wow, definitely sounds like you have a lot going on. So thanks so much for making the time to join us. Was teaching something that you've always wanted to do, or is it something that you discovered along the way?
I had no desire to teach. So if
Uh-huh.
you'd have asked me, like, I don't know, 12 years ago, what I was going to end up doing, I would have never even thought about teaching. So actually, I kind of stumbled across teaching. So in undergrad at Tulane, one of the unique things about Tulane is we get to have dissection-based cadaver courses for anatomy here for our undergrad students. And so I went to Tulane as well. And so when I was a student here, I actually got to take anatomy with dissection as an undergrad, and I loved it so much. And that's kind of what got me into the field of pathology. But at the time, I loved the lab so much, and the professor asked me if I wanted to TA, and selfishly I was like, absolutely, like I want to be dissecting. I love being in here, absolutely. And the teaching part didn't actually really draw me in. And now that I look back on it, honestly, that probably changed the entire course of my future, because I realized how much I loved teaching when I was then in the lab. So I didn't really realize I was going to love the teaching part of it. And then I just loved it. And so I've been teaching ever since. And I can't really imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds super rewarding. And how does social media play into your everyday job, or does it in any way?
So it kind of depends on what I'm doing. I do try to tie in anytime I'm doing clinical work. So by training, I am a pathologist assistant. And so if I'm doing anything, any pathology cases, if there's anything that I think would be really helpful to use to teach people, I like to incorporate that. But of course, it's never going to be in real time because you want to be very careful with HIPAA. So I do kind of take some of my clinical work and then use that to teach. But also what my main motivation usually behind my posts is whatever I'm working on with various groups of students. If I notice that there's a topic that students are really struggling with, or something that I just think, oh, we don't really have a good resource for this, then I'll try to make that and then release that on social media, because number one, it gives me kind of a different way to interact with my own students. But also, if my students don't have a good resource for something, then chances are other people don't either. And so it's always kind of like, I'll get inspired during class and be like, oh, hey, I should make X, Y, or Z, and then share that. And so you can kind of tell what I'm up to at work if you just kind of look at my various social media accounts, which is kind of fun. And then now actually with the PA program, they actually have their own Instagram account. And so they all post cases and educational content and just kind of updates on what they're doing in the program. And so now that gets to tie into my job a lot too, because I try to help them create that content, and then all of our faculty members will kind of monitor that and make sure it's all appropriate and all of that. So actually there's a lot of social media that goes into my day-to-day.
Especially with anatomy, where you need to see pictures along with it. I feel like Instagram is such an interesting way to introduce this content to trainees. So that's really cool. Can you tell us a little bit about how you initially discover or start thinking about starting an Instagram account, or is it happenstance, or is it something that you've tried over the years?
So actually, when I was in school, when I was in PA school, I was honestly very frustrated with the fact that not a lot of people even knew what the profession was. And so at the time, I went to PA school up north, and then I wanted to come back to New Orleans because I had gone to Tulane, and I wanted to come back here. So I actually flew down to New Orleans and met with the pathology department here at Tulane and was like, hey, I want to do my clinical rotations here. And they had actually never heard of a pathologist assistant. Fast forward however many years it's been, I don't know, 5, 6. Now we have a PA program. So that's like insane, first of all, but
Awesome.
it wasn't uncommon. So a lot of people hadn't heard about the profession. And then in general, I feel like pathology isn't as well understood. So then kind of within that, the pathologist assistant profession is even less understood and even known about. And so a lot of times people that I would talk to that were in the field of pathology said, I had never heard of this. And then I kind of stumbled across it and it was the perfect profession. And so I was like, how can we promote this profession, and not just our profession, but all of pathology? And then on top of that, I was teaching anatomy at the time at Tulane, and I was like, it would be nice to have different ways to kind of share this information and give these resources to people who aren't as lucky as we are at Tulane to have these cadaver-based courses. And so those two kind of things just came together. And then basically the second I graduated from PA school, I created my Instagram account, like literally same day, because they had a policy at my school where we couldn't post anything like that on social media. And so literally the day I graduated, I made the account. And it was interesting because I made it at the time just kind of for like other PAs and other pathology people. And then I started adding in the anatomy, and then it just kind of grew over time. And now it's just kind of a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different things.
You kind of mentioned the the rules that you have when you were in training about posting on Instagram. So I guess along with that, were there any other challenges that you encountered along the way when you were just starting out on social media that you think other people should look out for?
I think anything in the medical field, HIPAA is the most important thing to be aware of when you're focusing on social media. Some things you don't even realize might be identifying. They really can be, especially if you have a page where it has your name and people know where you work. So actually, when I first started my Instagram, it was totally anonymous. It didn't have my name at all. And then over time, my students started using it more. And then I decided I wanted to have kind of like more of a face with it so that I could actually interact with people. But that is one tip, is if you're worried about that type of stuff, you can kind of keep it anonymous. But that's definitely like the biggest hurdle, I would say. But also just technology in general. There's so many different apps and things that you can use to make content, and then how do you organize the content and the content gets lost? Like there's definitely a lot of struggles with it. And I don't think sometimes you realize how much time can go into a post. So that is a big struggle when you're first starting out. To make it educational, it can take a lot of time to kind of create that content instead of just posting random pictures. So actually the other day I was looking back at some of my first posts, and they weren't as educational. Like they were respectful, and you could learn it if you already knew what the specimen was, but it didn't really have like a full-on description or labels and stuff. And I look back and I'm like, if you didn't know what this was, this wouldn't be that helpful. And so kind of just learning that. And then once you start to have people who ask you questions or comment on it, you start to figure out what is actually helpful for people and what isn't as helpful. And then you can kind of go from there.
What are some of the things that you really enjoyed about having Instagram and Twitter and being on social media?
I love that you can, number one, you can make so many connections. Like I've been able to meet so many people on social media that I would have not ever probably met. So even at, let's say like a pathology conference, for example, you go and there's a chance to network, but there's also so many people and you have so many other things that you need to be doing that networking isn't as helpful as it can be on social media, because if it's social media, it's there constantly and anybody can interact with you at any time, and they can even see, you know, what you're posting, what your interests are, and so you can really start to collaborate with people from other institutions. So I'm working on a couple different projects right now that would not have happened without just being on social media and then somebody messaging me and being like, hey, blah blah blah, or me messaging somebody and saying, hey, I really liked what you posted on this. And so that has been huge. But also not just interacting with people that I don't know and networking, interacting with my students. So I get to interact with them now on social media outside of set class time and in kind of a different way. And so I find that to be super rewarding. Um, I don't know. And then it challenges me constantly to just come up with different and better things. So I'm constantly redoing all of my educational content, which I probably shoot myself in the foot a lot with that because I spend more time than I probably need to. But when I'm thinking about how this could be presented in a different or a better way for an Instagram post, let's say, then I'm like, oh, wow, I should probably change my entire lecture on that. And so I think it keeps me, I don't know, kind of fresh.
Keeps you thinking creatively. What are some ways that you think you would like to, you're already so established on social media. What are some future directions that you would like to take your account or your social media presence?
So I would like it to be more organized. um, Initially, like I said, it was just kind of, if I was talking about something in class, I had an inspiration to make a post. And so with that, it's kind of all over the place. And so I recently, actually, literally, I think 2 nights ago, I was adding, I think they're called guides on Instagram, where you can pick a bunch of different posts and put them all within one guide. And so I hope to be able to organize the content so that people can find it without scrolling through all like 1,000 of my posts. Because even sometimes when I try to go back and find something to give somebody as a resource, I have to scroll through and it takes me forever. So I'm hoping that I can find a way to organize it so that people can find, like, let's say they're learning about the upper extremity. If they wanted to find the, I don't know, pictures and videos I've posted on that, then they could just click upper extremity and make their lives a lot easier. But also, I'd like to do a couple different themes. So something I started, I believe it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, was a series on pathology in the anatomy lab. And so I'd like to keep going on a couple different mini series with that. And again, that's just to kind of help with organization of the content, because I don't know. But at the same time, I kind of like that it's all spur of the moment and because of certain inspiration in class. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
At least with categorizing, I've noticed that Instagram has some limits too. I don't think you could categorize posts probably to the way that you would like. Have you thought about getting into other platforms as well for that purpose?
So I did try for a while to kind of categorize them on my anatomy website, but then the problem is my website is more geared towards just regular anatomy. And so then when I try to add in my path content to that, then that can get kind of muddy the waters, I guess. So maybe I should just change the title of my website and have it be anatomy and pathology instead of just anatomy. But then you can link the different content within sub pages and subfolders. So that kind of helps. But it's also just a lot to manage. It takes a lot of time. And so
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
always
sure.
have good intentions with it and I'll organize it on there. And then I won't do it for a couple months and then I'll have to go back in and organize it all. So I don't know.
For students who are thinking about getting involved in social media or starting on social media, how do you think that we could use these platforms to advance medical education going forward?
One thing that I think is really important is it's very helpful for disseminating recent research articles. So, for example, let's say like pre-social media, you can still publish articles within the various journals, but then people aren't going to find it unless they're searching for that topic or they regularly read that journal. Whereas if you're sharing, let's say you publish an article and you can just share that on Twitter or share that on your Instagram, and then it spreads it a lot quicker, I have found. And something that I've found that it helps with kind of with my teaching role is that students can look at your social media and see what your various interests and roles are. So if they look at it and they say, oh, I know that Sarah's doing like this research project that really interests me, then they can reach out to me about that instead of just kind of being like, well, I want to get involved in research, but I don't really know what any of our professors really do. And so I think it can help with that side of things, like research and teaching and just getting that out there. And then as far as medical students, they can see what all their different faculty members are doing. And then that can help them kind of narrow down who they want to network with, what they want to work on. And also, depending on the person and how they run their social media, if you're showing kind of like a day in the life type of thing, it can really help medical students kind of see into different specialties and see what it's like, and then that can help them pick their elective rotations. It can also really, really, really help narrow down if they want to do away rotations, because if a department or different faculty members at an institution have social media, you can kind of see that, you can contact them, you can use that as networking, and then say, hey, that's a department I would really like to do a rotation at, or that's a department I would really like to apply to for residency. And then another thing that can be really helpful for medical education is just having other resources. So I know a lot of our students here, they'll use outside resources in addition to their, typical lecture content and things like that. And so being able to find that stuff on social media can be really helpful for students just for studying purposes.
A lot of different specialties, I feel like. You probably wouldn't have had a lot of exposure or opportunities to be exposed to that specialty if you didn't either shadow in it or knew somebody personally who were in that specialty. Now you can look on Instagram and see all these residents who are training in it, and it's just, I think it brings a lot more transparency to medicine and medical education as well. So
yeah, I definitely agree with the transparency. And I think that's really important for medical students, but also anyone who is, I guess, pre-med, but kind of more general, trying to figure out what they want to do, whether they want to go to medical school, PA, PT, NP, any of the other professions, because it really helps, like you said, with the transparency. You can kind of see into a day in the life. You can see into the day in the life of medical students. You can see into the day in the life of residents in various specialties, even, attending physicians. If they're on social media, you can kind of see that. And so I feel like, I don't know, 10 years ago, pre-medical students, they didn't know all their options, first of all. And some of them, I feel like, didn't really know exactly what they were getting themselves into.
Sure.
But now that there's so many medical students on social media and kind of sharing their experiences, even if it's just more like a personal, I don't know, their study journey or the day in the life of a medical student, I feel like that really helps when people are trying to figure out what they want to do. So I think it's really great.
Absolutely.
And I do think it brings a lot of transparency to all of the different levels.
Absolutely. Is there, one particular area or a couple of areas where you think that we're still lacking in transparency in, and that we could, help increase awareness through social media?
Well, I think probably everybody has to be at least a little bit hesitant about the negatives of the job, because you never want to be on social media. I mean, first of all, nobody wants to hear all of the negatives. That's not what people are following you for typically. But also, something you have to be concerned about is backlash from any of your jobs. You don't want to go on there and, I don't know, talk about the negatives of your job and then make it seem like you're complaining about your institution or things like that. So I do think it's kind of a fine line of acting like everything's great and perfect and also showing the reality of the job without just being negative or complaining about your institution or things like that. Because I think, especially in academic medicine, there's a lot of things that aren't talked about as much and you don't really learn about until you're in that situation. But at the same time, you don't want to just be promoting all the negatives about it. So it's kind of a hard thing to promote on social media, but also I do think that it's something that we could do a better job of doing.
Especially with medicine, I feel like with a lot of different aspects in medicine, people could feel like they're the only ones experiencing something if it's challenging, because there's generally, like, people don't really talk about the things that can go wrong or the things that are difficult with um, training or any of the different aspects of medicine. So you're absolutely right that I think there should be a push for more of not only the positives, but also covering the negatives day to day, or like the negatives of each role or situation, and kind of a healthy mix of that.
Yeah. And I do think it has been a little bit improved with COVID, because I know a lot of health professionals are sharing their experience just
Mm,
trying to educate the general public
yeah,
about how bad it has been in a
right.
healthcare setting. And so I think that that has definitely started that shift.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to see what happens with that in the future. So I don't know.
Do you have any parting thoughts for people who are interested in getting involved in social media?
I would say if it's interesting you, then just go ahead and do it. Don't let perfection be standing in the way of you trying something new. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. It can be really scary, especially if you're, trying to act as an expert in an area, to put yourself out there and put your content out there. But the whole point of doing it is not only to help other people, but also help you grow as a student or an educator or a
Mm,
physician, whatever the case may be. Because let's say you post something and someone corrects you, that's not a
yeah.
bad thing. Like,
Mm,
that's only going to help you grow and help your content get even better. So I would say if you're even considering it, just go ahead and go for it, and don't be scared of doing it, and also don't be scared to ask people for help with it, because I think it's really important with the way that medicine is moving, and it can really help you with your future and your residency applications and all of that. So just do it.
well, thank you so much again, Sarah, for joining us. And thank you, all of our listeners, for tuning in on our mini series on social media.